Kiewit in RTD, our silver level P&H equipment and WSP, and our copper level land acquisition services. Thank you very much. We appreciate your support, and having the corporate sponsors is definitely helpful to our organization and help support our small businesses and all of the special programs that we've got going on, like today. We want to recognize our board of directors, Kelly Kelly of Kiewit, Carla Romero Perez of HDR, Rusty Gonzalez of St. Andrews Construction Services, Stephen Pouliot of Michael Baker International, Jeff Knight of JKS Industries, and Michael Unger of WSP. Thank you for being our board members. I will hand it off to Travis Bogan.
We want to take a minute just to emphasize and restate COMTO's mission to provide opportunities in the transportation industry for minority participation and advancement through advocacy, training, and professional development. We also want to take the opportunity, next slide please, to talk about our Colorado chapter strategic framework, which is build, organize, learn, and earn. We want to leverage like minds and promote growth and transparency. We want to expose and educate youth and businesses and create economic opportunities. Reminder, we have membership meetings the third Thursday of every month at 5 p.m. The next meeting is October 15th, and we hope to see you there. And upcoming major events, COMTO Week will occur in November 16th through 20th, and we have some great stuff planned that we'll share with you in our newsletters. And one more thing, we're very excited. We're working on launching a new COMTO Colorado Transportation podcast. So it'll be a great place to get more dialogue and discussion going. So look forward to that coming soon.
Thanks, Travis. So unfortunately, I can't see the screen. So if anyone has just joined us, thank you again. We welcome you, and we're really excited about tonight. Let's go ahead and get started. I will introduce our moderator tonight, Eulois Cleckley. Eulois serves as the Executive Director of the new Department of Transportation and Infrastructure for the City and County of Denver. He's led the creation of DOTI, and as Executive Director, he runs one of the city's largest and most dynamic departments focused on modernizing Denver's transportation system, constructing public facilities, maintaining sanitary and sewer systems, and providing solid waste removal, recycling, and composting services. In his role as Executive Director, he oversees 1,300 employees and is responsible for the department's $340 million annual budget and a $1.2 billion capital program. Previously, he worked for the Houston-Galveston Area Council, where he served as the Deputy Director of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which covers the 8-county Houston-Galveston region, and provided overall strategic direction related to city and regional transportation planning, project development, and implementation. Prior to his work with the Houston-Galveston Area Council, Cleckley served as Chief of Statewide and Regional Planning, and later Acting Chief of the Field Operations Division for Washington, D.C.'s District Department of Transportation. His previous experience includes private consulting for local and state governments and working as a transportation specialist at the United States Department of Transportation, and serving as the founder and CEO of a nonprofit organization focused on community and business engagement. In June of 2020, Cleckley was elected to serve as president for the Colorado chapter of the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials. Inspired by the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1967 speech, "What is your blueprint?" he seeks to elevate COMTO's platform while adding value to its members using the 4 inspirational pillars: build, organize, learn, and earn. He also currently serves as the Vice President of the National Association of City Transportation Officials and is a member of the Transportation Research Board. Mr. Cleckley has transportation and economics degrees from North Carolina A&T State University and a global logistics specialist professional designation from California State University. Ladies and gentlemen, Eulois Cleckley.
All right, thank you, Marsha. Who wrote that? Did you? But truly appreciate everybody showing up today. I think this is a very appropriate topic, and we have some fantastic panelists here to help engage in the conversation. And we are really encouraging everyone who's logged in today to really participate and take part in this topic that is really around making sure that we create justice for all of our neighborhoods, all of our cities, and all of the people that live in our neighborhoods and our cities, not only here in Denver, the Denver region, state of Colorado, but also across the nation. And so I'm excited to introduce the panelists. We have three great panelists, and after the introduction, we'll get into a set of questions, and then we, of course, encourage everybody to use the chat to type in your questions, and we can relay them to the panelists. So with that being said, first panelist up is Ms. Tamika Butler. She is the principal and founder of Tamika L. Butler Consulting, and she's a dynamic speaker. And I tell you, if you have not heard Tamika in public, you're missing out. She's definitely a treat, and we're so grateful that Tamika has decided to join us today. She's a national expert and speaker on issues related to the built environment, equity, anti-racism, diversity and inclusion, organizational behavior, and change management. From speaking to writing to training, Tamika has worked with a myriad of clients. She, as I mentioned before, is the principal and founder of Tamika L. Butler Consulting, where she focuses on shining a light on inequality, inequity, and social justice. She provides consulting, training, coaching, and public speaking for a wide range of organizations in the public and private sector. So thank you, Tamika. You have helped out the city and county of Denver over the past year or some change, and we're very happy to have you here as a part of the panel. So the next panelist that we have is again another friend to the city and county of Denver, to the region, and to the state, is Zavala. She is the executive director of Mile High Connects, and Dea leads the development and implementation of Mile High Connects strategic direction. She's responsible for fundraising and relationship management to advance that organization's collective priorities. Prior to joining Mile High Connects, she dedicated her career to supporting inspiring Black, Latinx, and entrepreneurs of color in the Colorado, in Texas, as a pathway to community asset and wealth building. She also brings national experience, having worked with the NALCAB, National Association of Latino Community Asset Builders, where she facilitated a variety of community economic development projects in support of member organizations, including resource development and capacity building activities. So thank you, Dea. You felt this out as well. Dea has sat in on a variety of different roles and really helped support the city and county of Denver, particularly in the current COVID environment, as we get back and make sure that what we're planning for from a transportation perspective does not negatively impact some of our most vulnerable users and communities. And so lastly, we have the pleasure of having Mr. Freddie Fuller. Freddie is the COMTO National Chair and Vice President at Jacob. And Freddie's a proven leader and is a public servant, and has spent his entire professional career in the public transportation industry. He has more than 23 years of transportation experience, and has utilized his education, expertise, and relationships to engage and connect organizations and individuals within the transit industry. He currently leads the National Transit Payment Systems team with a focus on business development for transit and rail pursuits across the United States and Canada. Freddie's been asked to serve as a liaison between Jacobs and several political organizations, including the African American Mayors Association, Community Leaders of America, International City/County Management Association, National Association of Counties, National League of Cities, and the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And so as a consultant, Freddie also currently serves on the boards of the national, of course, of COMTO, and as a national chair and as the secretary and treasurer of APTA, the American Public Transportation Association. So I won't read the rest of his background. He's very extensive, and Freddie and I go way back. And so very happy that he took the time out of his busy schedule to join us today. So that being said, panelists, are you guys ready? All right. So let's start it off. The one question, since this topic is really about moving towards justice and addressing equity in transportation, I'd like to ask each one of you if you spend a minute or two just really explaining what does equity mean to you. And I'll start with Freddie.
Well, first of all, thank you, Eulois. Thank you to COMTO, Colorado. And it is certainly a privilege and an honor to be sitting on a panel with Daya and Tamika. I was concerned that Tamika was going to wear one of her bow ties tonight because I'm known for rocking bow ties too. And I was like, she's going to come with it. And I'm so concerned, but she's got it buttoned all the way up to the top. So I can appreciate that. First of all, I always, when I saw the question, I was like, well, who's defining equity? For me, it means access for all that meets them where they are and gives them what they want. A lot of times, folks will define equity for others, but they don't think about what the end user wants. And I'll give you an example, just a couple of quick examples when we go to other panelists. Like, we provide fixed route bus service at transit agencies all around the country, but a lot of times that service doesn't get people to where they need to go, whether it's to a job, whether it's to a school. Same thing with paratransit. They say, well, we're even providing complimentary service that gives even greater access. But the question really is, does that paratransit give them what they need? Does it satisfy their needs and meet their goals? So it's one to give access, but then again, to meet them where they are and give them what they want. So that's my spiel on the equity.
Great. That's fantastic. Daya, what about your definition of equity?
I was going to say, Freddie just took everything out of my mouth. So, yeah, I mean, for Mile High Connects and for me personally, when we talk about equity, we really want to center racial equity. And so making that as explicit as possible, that we're not just talking about equity, because especially lately, conversations around equity get really mixed into this conversation around equality. And so we get confused. We're talking about equality when we're really talking about equity, and exactly what Freddie mentioned, like meeting people where they are and what their true needs are. So, for Mile High Connects, it's all about how Black, Brown, Indigenous communities are accessing jobs, accessing affordable housing, and having seats at the tables that they need to be at to really influence change in their neighborhood, in their city, in their region. And really, I think for us, mobility and transportation is just like how they get there, right? It's the center, it's the backbone of what we need to really achieve true equity in our region.
All right, great, fantastic. And then Tamika, what does equity mean to you?
Yeah, I definitely thought about the bow tie, but I didn't want to, come as too flashy for the Denver folks when we're a little nervous about the Nuggets taking us out. So I gotta keep a low profile. But thanks for having me. I think sometimes Daya said it best when we're talking about equity, because people aren't talking about the same thing. You have to be explicit with what you're saying. I think part of that is not being afraid to say inequity, right? Sometimes we say equity would look like everybody having access to affordable, dignified public transportation. But the reality is, in some neighborhoods, they do have that access. And so we're not actually we're talking about getting to the inequities. And what's really important is that we do get some common language around it, because equity is like the color blue. Right? Like, some people are saying navy, some people are saying electric blue, some people are saying aqua, and what do we really mean? And so a lot of people think of that picture with the folks looking over the fence, and equality is giving, the short person and the tall person the same amount of boxes to see over the fence, and equity is giving everybody what they need. And I think that's a good way to conceptualize it. I would just push people to think a little harder. We're not just trying to see over the fence. True work, and that is grounded in equity, is also moving towards liberation, also moving towards the fence not being there. What are the barriers to transportation that is dignified and reliable? Let's move those barriers down, not just look over the fence. And beyond that, and I'll end with this, I think when we talk about equity, we have to be willing to talk about power, and we have to be able to talk about privilege. And who has the power to make the decisions about our transportation systems, and who are most often impacted? So even in that picture, someone with power still said, what you want is to watch baseball, right? And I think often as transportation professionals, we come into situations and we say, we're telling you what you want. And the reality is maybe I hate baseball. Maybe I don't. Maybe I want to play. Maybe I want to be the umpire. Maybe I want to coach. Maybe I want to own the team. Maybe I'm a budding entrepreneur and I want to sell peanuts in the stand on my way to my booming business, right? And so we have to trust in community a bit to help guide what it is they want and not just say, we're going to remove the barriers to the baseball game because everybody wants baseball, right? And that's a big part of equity as well.
Wow, that's good stuff. I love that comment. Not trying to just see over the fence, trying to figure out how you can remove the fence all on its own. So that's great. So let's move on to some more detailed questions here. And the first two are really for Bea and Tamika, but Freddie, if you do have some comments here, I'd like to hear from you. One of the aspects that we deal with here in Denver, the Denver region, and the state is the fact that we are trying to retrofit our transportation and mobility system due to the fact that there were some poor planning and design decisions that were made 60 or 70 years ago. And so I'll be curious to hear from Daya. I'll start with you first, but how have you seen past policies or decisions and practices regarding transportation infrastructure, even services like transit and the like? How have you seen those past policies and practices affect communities?
Yeah, so I'll share two, and I really want to touch on a comment that Tamika made around getting community and getting in there with community. And I think one policy that we were really successful and really thankful to the your Diamond sponsor, RTD, in implementing was really the LIVE program, which is the low income fare program. This was and is a community-driven solution started back in 2012 with grassroots organizers from 9 to 5, United for a New Economy, which really, for us to be in 2020 and have a low-income pass program compared to other transit agencies in the country is impressive. At the same time, it's, I would say, effective-ish in that we're not really reaching everyone that needs access to this discount, right? And especially right now in times of COVID, when people's paychecks are just being stretched beyond their means, we really need to look at some creative solutions and think about how we can support those that are most vulnerable and those that are really feeling it right now, feeling their paychecks being stretched thin. I think the other thing that I just want to touch on, because I hear a lot of conversation around micromobility, ride hailing, carpool, which I think are great alternatives, but it's also not a one-size-fits-all solution for some of our communities. About 17% of Coloradans are underbanked, which means they have a bank account or they may not have a bank account. 5% do not have a bank account, so they're what's known as unbanked. So when I think about ride-hailing solutions as options for micromobility, I always think in the back of my mind of my grandmother who doesn't have a bank account, doesn't have a credit card, and yet as an alternative transportation solution, we're asking her to get on Lyft and she just doesn't feel comfortable. So, going back to the first question around equity, just being really mindful about how we bridge that cultural divide and how we really make sure that whatever policies and practices that we want to move into, that we're keeping folks that are on the fringe really at the forefront.
Yeah, that's great. And sometimes the exciting new micromobility service sometimes intentionally or unintentionally creates a digital barrier. And so, it's definitely a focus that we don't want to get so enthused by the shiny object where we forget about having, instead of a road or a bridge, create that barrier that technology is doing the same. So Tamika, what about your experience or your know-how in terms of past policies and practices that have impacted communities in a negative manner?
I think what's hard for us to sometimes remember is that so much of our policies and past, whether or not you're talking about transportation or just general planning and land use decisions, have had negative impacts on our communities. And right now, the New York Times has a lot of bestsellers that are about race and racism, right? We've seen more folks awaken to the injustices in the world with the dual pandemics of COVID and racial injustice. And one of the books that's on the bestsellers list is The Color of Law. And it talks about redlining and how we literally drew our maps around home ownership have impacted folks of color. And the subheading to that book is the forgotten history of, how we did this. And what I would offer is a forgotten history for who? Because for so many Black and brown and low income folks are folks with disabilities who have had to be pushed further out from city centers. They know how policies stick with us for a while. And so sometimes the pushback against doing equity work is, well, it takes longer. Well, if I'm going to have to engage the community. And what I offer to people, and I would always tell my staff this when I was at an organization, a nonprofit developer that built parks and gardens, what's actually going to take longer is if we have to retrofit it. And it's going to come back to us. If we just try to do this, if we just try to push something through, at some point, we're going to have to reckon with how highways were put together in this country. We're going to have to recognize, how different bus lines and train lines work and don't work and what communities they go to. And so, the last thing I always ask people to think about, I think we used to have a world that was very siloed, and in some places we still do. And we've all been to those public meetings where the transportation planner or engineer had somebody say, well, this is my issue. I'm worried about gentrification or displacement, or I'm worried about the fact that I'm unbanked. And as transportation professionals, we say, well, I'm just the transportation planner. I can't help you with that. And I would offer, especially to the leaders on this call of organizations, that person is no longer the person you need at those meetings. Because as Dea said, if you can't be ready to hear about somebody who's unbanked, then you're not going to be able to help. If you can't understand that the further we push folks from the city center, whether or not we do congestion pricing or not, when they try to come back in, we're going to have to figure out how to get service to those folks on transit. And so it's not that you have to solve all of these problems, but you have to acknowledge that there are these intersections, and that for the community members who show up with these questions, they're like, I don't care who you are. You're with the city. You're with the agency. And so we have to start thinking that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. So, Freddie, I have a question for you to switch gears here a little bit and talk about the business aspect and professional development around equity and transportation. And so, this week is National Small Business Week, and the U.S. Small Business Administration, so SBA, has used this week to really celebrate the contributions of entrepreneurs and small business owners in the country. But if you really look at the numbers, especially around transportation or infrastructure related projects, minorities represent about 28% of the population. But for DOT related projects or transportation projects at the federal, state or local level, minorities only own 9% of the construction firms and receive about 5% of the construction receipts. It's the most recent information. So COMTO, we're here to kind of represent not only the individual professional, but the small business in the transportation industry. So what are things that businesses can do to really take advantage of the transportation industry to help, step over that last hurdle, which is true economic inclusion, which has such a great impact across some of our Black and brown communities?
Well, Eulois, I appreciate the question, but I tell you right off the bat, I didn't like the question from the beginning, because for so long, the onus has been placed on my small and minority businesses to figure out how to navigate a system, in my opinion, that was never built to make them successful. And it's a fact that we're still dealing with some of the same issues that we've dealt with for years, even though we have, 49 CFR Part 26. I may be getting the numbers in the title wrong. The DBE program, which COMTO was on the Hill to talk about with legislators yesterday. But when you ask that question, the first thing I thought about is like asking, why aren't there more minority executives at corporations like the one I work at? You can dot all the I's, you can cross all the T's. As for a small business, You can meet all the certifications. You can have all the bonding. But that still doesn't mean you're going to be successful or get the contract. And I immediately said to myself, there is no silver bullet. There is no right or wrong way to go about acquiring this business. My man Marvin Thomas is on the line, and he knows. I mean, he's in partnership with us right now at Jacobs. But the reality is, not until government agencies get intentional about making it a priority to give minority firms work, and not until major corporations like the one I work for get intentional about making minority firms partners on contracts, will it ever be a way to make the transportation industry a level playing field for all of these smaller minority businesses. And it becomes a little frustrating because we have done it for years and years. And when I first read the question and then you presented, I said, well, which businesses are responsible for this navigation? Is it the smaller minority-owned businesses to figure it out? Or is it the majority firms like mine to make a way? Or is it the government agencies that have the work to develop a way to open the door? And to kind of piggyback or to give you an example, New York City MTA has decided that X percentage is going to be given to smaller minority businesses. And their head of their DBE program was on a call earlier today. Every contract that the MTA awards, he has to sign off on to ensure that they are doing what they said they're going to do. And there's so many folks out here are saying, if you just get the certifications, if you just get the bonding, if you just make the right connections, the work will come. And it's not like that. And it's making me think about something Tamika said when she was talking to ITE recently. And as I get older, I forget, but it was something to the effect of the access or something like, I can't remember now, Tamika, and I'm sure you will probably come back with it. But, you know, the people that are given the access, they can make the decisions to give it to the people they want to. And until they make a decision that it's important enough to them that minorities should have this work, it's going to continue to be a struggle. And the reality is nothing has changed in all these years. No, there's not been a significant change, I'll say, in all these years with minority programs, DBE programs. There's not been an impact where we've seen a significant turnaround in this game. And I'll just stop right there. I guess the last thing I'll say, we got to get people to start giving minority firms access to capital. Giving them access to capitals open doors that they can't get through right now. And that is one of the biggest hurdles for minority firms. You got these net worth requirements. If you get too much money, it plays you out of the game. But if you don't have enough money, you can't be considered for the big contracts. And that someday we've got to give them enough access to capital so that they can build their own wealth and really stand on their own and not even be a part of any kind of minority program going forward.
Yeah, that's good. And I don't know if Tamika or Daya, and I see Marvin popped himself up here as well. But you know, Freddie, you challenged the question, right? So you're saying, hey, whose responsibility is it to ensure that there's access and equal opportunity for all? And so let me say this because we have people here that represent our Department of Small Business Opportunity that kind of works with our city and county of Denver departments to ensure that we're at least trying to set goals on projects and the like and try to help wrap around services. But is this a government responsibility? Is it a prime? Or is it something that we need to do a better job in terms of helping some of our small business community kind of just get prepared for those opportunities? If you would have to divide it up, where do you think the number one onus should rely?
So
we'll think about it like this. I'm sorry. Was somebody going to respond to that?
Go ahead, Freddie. Yeah.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to jump in, in my experience, having worked with small business owners, and these were small business owners, like mom and pop shops, all the way to no more than maybe 10 employees. And, Freddie, I think you hit it right on the head, right? They don't want to go through the process of getting all of these certifications and then just like going into the hamster wheel and hoping eventually something will come up. I mean, I had so many entrepreneurs that were trying to get contracts with the city, and after just a few tries, they just stopped. They were like, this is a waste of my time. I don't want to go through this process. So, I mean, I think the responsibility really lies both at the city, within governments, and really looking at what are the barriers that we're putting in place for these businesses, recognizing that there's already systemic barriers to minority entrepreneurship. So how are we just exacerbating that? And then the second piece is really to these larger construction companies and these larger corporations that, have been built really on the just to put it really bluntly, built on the backs of Black and brown people who have been working on the front lines, and yet they're not reaping the benefits of this. And really saying, okay, how do we go in either with a contract with this entrepreneur, but have this entrepreneur be the main applicant, and then we come in as a sub, or something, like just thinking about it a little bit more creatively, rather than just putting all of the onus on the entrepreneur, because it's hard out there, and especially with COVID, it's even worse for an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I think to Freddie's point, some of this is about that piece around power and access, right? And I think the example he's talking about that I gave before is, for so many of us, we, even if whether we started off as a small business or we've joined a larger business, but we've worked our way up, we've seen our success. America is built on the ideal that if you work hard, you deserve all of your success, right? And so we see ourselves climbing this ladder, getting to the top of the mountain, and then you just got very close. You can see it. And all of a sudden, I think for many people, they're having this realization of like, oh my gosh, systematic racism. Oh my goodness, inequality. And now they're stuck. And they're like, do I crawl down? Do I go back down the ladder? But I'm so close. What do I do? And then when they climb down the ladder, are they moving it over to the next mountain and starting over? Are they moving the ladder but getting out of the way? And I think to Freddie's point, until folks who are not folks of color, who are not small business, who are not minority veteran-owned business, until they start making this their problem and realizing that they do have power, they are holding the ladder, and they can decide to move it, they can decide to move out of the way, and they can also decide to say, I'm not just coming at you for my 5% requirement. I see that you have more to offer. I see that you can do more. I was on a panel with a Black architect, and he's like, there's so few Black architects in the country. I know all of them. And frankly, I am sick of being a DBE because I am good at my job. I am a world-class architect, and you should want me on your team because I'm good, not because I'm checking a box. And I don't want these small projects. I can do big projects. And so I think we need those folks who are holding the keys, holding the ladder, to realize that they have a role to play in this too, not just those of us who are minority-owned small businesses.
Yeah, that's fantastic points, Freddie.
Yeah, she went there where I wanted her to go, because she talked about your path to success. You go to college, you do this, you do that, but that's not everybody's path. That's not how it works for the people that are not privileged. It's not that great for the people that are not privileged, and these minority businesses are not privileged. And it's not the same path for them like it is for somebody that has that privilege.
Yeah, this is fantastic conversation and great points. It's something that we're challenged with, and I think this kind of leads into a question that I have as a challenge to COMTO and to a challenge to our chapter. What do we need to be doing to really help facilitate change and really help support some of our small business? And then also in the whole concept that we're talking about right now, which is really trying to make sure that our transportation infrastructure is one that's accessible for everybody. So what can we do as an organization and as a chapter locally? So So Freddie, you're the national chair. So let me start with you.
And as the national chair, I'm going to take a point of privilege because I get to hear what people think all the time. And I want to hear what our panelists think COMTO should do. And then I'll tell you what I think we should do.
All right, very good. So listen, I like that deflection, Freddie. That's pretty.
I literally wrote that down. I was like, I'm not going to be the first one to answer this question.
So let's go to Tamika. Tamika, what do you think? What should COMTO be doing right now?
So I think what's so important, and part of it, I always talk about the makeup of our organizations, and part of that is because my background is actually as a civil rights lawyer. I was actually an employment discrimination lawyer. And so I think it might be different for this particular entity, which is, based on bringing together folks of color. But I do think those of us who are lucky enough and skilled enough and work hard enough to advance in our careers, we have to force our institutions to start reflecting the communities that they're serving. And when we have folks out here like the CEO of Wells Fargo who still believe that there is a pipeline issue, that there just aren't talented people of color, for me, that's where organizations like this one come in to be like, nah, we got you, homie, right? And so I think when we know that when we look at the ridership of our systems, super diverse, when we look at the leadership, the boards, the folks in high positions, it's not the case. And again, I would just also always caution that with saying it's not just hiring more folks of color, more women, more folks with disabilities or indigenous folks, because we also can't be forced to do all the work, right? And so I think it's also providing the support for the white folks, and at this point, if you're motivated by guilt or if you're motivated by doing the right thing, like if you're ready to be in this fight with us, then how can we provide that support and resources? And so when there is someone who says, I want to hire Black folks, but I don't know where to find them, how can we be the folks who have that difficult conversation with them? That's like, nah, homie, don't say that. But also, let's talk about how you create and how you have those relationships. And let's talk about why maybe you can't find them. Are you just reaching out to your networks and your friends and everybody you hang out with is just like you? And so being the support and the backbone to provide some of those spaces.
Yeah, that's great. Daya, what do you think COMTO should be doing?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that came to mind for me, and I think this echoes back to a comment that Tamika made, is really pushing those in power to move or redistribute their resources, right? If you all, as a statewide entity, have those folks that are sitting and holding the power, how can you as COMTO start to push them, to Tamika's point, to say, okay, we're not just here to set goals. We really want to push you to figure out what is your policy and what is your new mandate, right? So that we're not just sitting here with empty promises and empty goals, but really shifting the conversation to true equity and true racial equity, right? We're not just saying we want to hire 10%, Black, Indigenous, Brown people, but instead we're saying, no, this is a mandate. This is how we're going to move forward, and we're going to hold ourselves accountable to it. And I think the second piece of that is the accountability, not only to the membership, but accountability to the community. Because at the end of the day, that's really who we're all serving, community residents, and they need to see how we're shifting and how we're really changing the systems that we've set up.
Yeah, you said two key words. I think both of you did. You said mandate, and you said accountability, right? And so, and even we have some comments here in the chat that are suggesting the same. To move away from goals, to move to mandates, which is so much more powerful, and sets higher level expectation, just meeting an individual goal. So Freddie, you deflected. You had everybody else answer the question for you, but why don't you follow up and see, as the national chair, you heard what people want COMTO to do. So what do you think?
So first of all, you got to remember, when I look at COMTO, I don't just think about COMTO National and the national office and the staff. I don't just think about the board of directors. I believe the chapters are the lifeblood of our organization, as well as just every individual member of COMTO. So when I think about COMTO, I think about it holistically. As an organization, we and local chapters, we have to facilitate dialogues like the one y'all are doing tonight. There's absolutely no reason why every chapter shouldn't be facilitating this dialogue and start to begin to push the envelope in this space, especially in equity, transportation, racial injustice, the whole 9 yards. Do what we did yesterday. We should be front and center testifying in front of the House T&I committee about a DVE program that needs to be revamped and added to and improved in every other thing you can think of, every superlative, every adjective you can think of. But we also have to be willing to have those, and Tamika, I'm such a fan. So Tamika says brave space, right? You got to create an environment where we are willing to have the hard conversation about race, injustices, inequity. Because what I have found out in these last 6 months is it's an uncomfortable conversation, but we have to start making people feel comfortable with the uncomfortable. And we have to force it. And as individual members, and I'll use myself as an example, when you're on a board, when you're in a boardroom, when you're an executive, you have to be the one to stand up and say, this isn't right. For example, I sit on the board, on the executive committee for APTA, the American Public Transportation Association. And in my mind, I'm saying, how can we be a leader in racial equity and diversity and inclusion if our own organization doesn't step up to the plate? And there are no direct reports to the president and CEO that look like me. And I'm sitting in an executive committee meeting saying this. And I want to see diverse candidates brought to the table and be put in positions of leadership. And that's exactly what we have to do as COMTO members. You know, so many of us as minorities, we get into a role and we forget to reach back. We've got to unapologetically hire people that look like us. They do it. Nobody gets upset when all white guys get hired. So why should I be concerned because I'm hiring all brothers and sisters and other black and brown folks? I shouldn't have to apologize for that. I shouldn't have to tell you why. Nobody has ever explained why it's all white dudes in the boardroom. Nobody explains why there's all white people in the C-suite. So why not? And push the envelope. We got to continue the dialogue. So, there's another question you asked. I'm not going to go down that path. But we cannot fit in our roles and not take advantage of the situation. Ask the tough questions, create the dialogue that's uncomfortable, and hire the people that can make a difference. Because I think in the long run, you put the right people in place and things begin to change. As long as you don't have the diverse voices and thoughts in the room, you keep getting the same thing.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that, Freddie. I find it interesting because to your point, especially trying to get a diverse workforce in leadership positions, trying to figure out ways that you adjust processes, that you focus in on that, and you make it a priority and a mandate. We've been trying to do some things like that in the city, county of Denver, and particularly in our department. And somehow that's transitioned into a further greater legal justification to why we need to have diverse talent pools and the like for making certain decisions for leadership positions. I tell people diversity doesn't happen by happenstance. You have to force it sometimes, even if against your own kind of internal structure. So I appreciate that. And I think these are things that we can help city government and businesses to help address moving forward. So I know we'll definitely have support across the board there. So let me do this. Let me pause real quick. I'm gonna check the chat. I know we have a lot of great feedback and commentary here in the chat. And I'm gonna ask a couple questions, and then I got a couple more questions that are canned questions that we have for the panel. But one question, this is actually from Adrina. Hey, Dyanira, glad to have you join us. This one is for Freddie. And so can you provide some additional information or provide a point of contact regarding the MTA requirements that small businesses have to be included on every project?
Yeah, the gentleman's name is Michael Garner. He's the head of their program there. He's the direct report to the chairman and the CEO. I do have his information. The best way for me to get it to you is for you to reach out to me. You can either text me at 703-439-0085 or call or email me at freddie.fuller@jacobs.com. But Michael Garner is the gentleman you want to speak with.
All right. Fantastic. Thanks, Freddie. We have another question from Ms. Batts. Is there a reason there aren't opportunities for MBEs as primes versus a marginal percent of project teams? And I think, Freddie, this goes to kind of, and Tamika, what you said as well, and Daya as well. It's more than just getting toward a goal. What are some of the barriers that we think that are preventing some of our small businesses or MBEs from just becoming primes? Instead of being considered a Black architectural firm, why can't we just have the mentality to say that this is an architectural firm that can do the work and they just happen to be Black, right? So I'm curious. I'll just open it up to the panelists to see which one wants to take that one first.
I'm happy to start. I do think it is there's two pieces of it. There's the structural ways that racism is just built into our systems, and the way that people look at the list and they check the things off the list and they do the bare minimum. And there's also this personal level. And I think that's why we have to approach equity and racial equity in particular on both the systemic and the personal level, because the policies and the system and the processes that are in place are erecting these barriers, but those things are also enforced by people. Those things are also created by people. There's a transit agency here in California that just put out a huge multi-million-dollar contract, and it's different parts: engineering and planning, environmental, public engagement. And for the public engagement, they say they want they say they want to encourage small businesses, and they want to encourage people who have a deep understanding of equity. But to go after it, everyone on your team must have at least, or the leads of the different parts must have at least 15 years of experience. Most people in transportation haven't been doing deep equity work and talking about it in that way for 15 years. And so, sure, there are systems that have always been in place or have been in place where you might ask people, why is that the rule? And people are like, I don't even know. But we have to realize that we're perpetuating some of these systems that we've just gotten used to. And so we're putting a brand new RFP and we're doing the same things. And it's, as Freddie said, some of that is because it's not us in those positions. But I think sometimes even when it is us in those positions, sometimes we forget to reach back. Sometimes we've got into our spot. And we have to realize that white supremacy and whiteness don't mean you're white. Just like there are many women in corporate America who have very sexist and very patriarchal views, because in order to succeed, they were told you have to toughen up, you have to act more like a man, you have to do this. And so we're all part of the system of white supremacy, but we have to figure out both on the systemic and the personal level, what are we going to hold ourselves accountable? Daya's point, accountability is huge. What are we going to hold ourselves accountable to create some of this change?
Yeah, fantastic. Daya or Freddie?
Yeah, I don't know if Daya had a point. I think Tamika started off talking about policy, right? So you've got these DBE policies. Well, let me say this first. There's nothing written that says that a minority firm can't be a prime. Mm-hmm. But there are policies that, if I make too much money, then I'm going to fall out of this category. Or I don't have the access to wealth to build the type of team I need, or the bonding capability. Now, to go to another point she made, depending who's in the seat can make that change. Perfect example, because Marvin is sitting right on top of me on the screen, right, on my phone. So I can't help but talk about him. Marvin's firm, Tri-Unity, and another minority firm partnered, and they took the lead, and Jacobs is a sub and mentor to them on the largest contract ever awarded by a minority-led team at LA Metro. But that was all as a result of Phil Washington leading the way. And it's ironic that I got to talk about Phil on a Denver call. That's so funny to me. But Phil made it very clear that this is what we are going to do, and this is how we're going to do this. And he articulated that to his board of directors. He articulated that to his leaders. And when we were one of the firms that talked to him before this RFP hit the street, it was very clear to us what a team composition needed to look like. So they made no bones about it. And in this case, you have somebody that's being intentional. But if you don't have folks in place to do that, then you only get these one-offs every now and then from an organization. You don't get everybody doing it because you don't have people sitting in the seats to make it happen. And I'm sure Marvin could enlighten us. Marvin can tell us the balancing act he has with managing his net worth and then determining how he goes after a pursuit and how they get creative, if you will, with the way they go about it so that they don't exceed certain thresholds so that they can maintain their status. Because say if you do graduate from the DBE program, but then now you're at the bottom you competing against Jacobs and our competitors, and you're still really that minority firm. You just happen to, cross a threshold. That's all.
Yeah.
So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think what you're lifting is that, I'm sorry to interrupt. I mean, you're lifting that the white supremacist culture that's just built within all of our systems, including contracting, right? I mean, it's like ingrained in this contracting system.
Yeah. So Marvin, we have a lot to learn from you. You're not on the panel, but at some point we may get your thoughts here once we wrap up. So don't go anywhere, okay?
I'll be here.
All right, good. There's another question I do want to ask, and this ties to kind of a canned question that we have for the panelists. One is from Tom S. I guess how is it possible to have a fair transportation system when fairness doesn't exist amongst neighborhoods, schools, healthcare, employment, access, public services, etc.? And this dovetails into one of the questions that we were going to ask the panel. And this really has to do with this new conversation around this concept called the 15-minute city. And really the whole idea is to have increasing equitable access to food, medical services, and the like. And so I'm curious, this might be for Tamika and Daya first, but what do you guys think about this idea of this new 15-minute city, and that being the way to design cities moving forward to make sure that there's truly equity, amongst all of our communities?
I'm happy. You want me to jump in first, Dan? So I think both Tom's question and this question bring me back to something I said before, which is we have to think about intersectionality, right? And that's so important. When I was an employment discrimination lawyer, my focus was on race discrimination and gender discrimination. And the reality is, if I had a gay white man come in or a white person with a disability come in and they said I was discriminated against at work, and I said why, they would say because I'm disabled, because I'm gay. They would know clearly. But when I had an undocumented woman come in for whom English was not her first language, and she was gay and she had a disability, and I said, why are you discriminated against? She's like, it could be a lot of things, right? Like because she's living at the intersections of all of these different identities. And I think any of us who do transportation work, we understand the intersections are where the action's at. It might be easier to do a project and just put a park bench or a parklet or a bus stop mid-block, but the action where we can really make impact, where we can really dramatically change outcomes, are at the intersections. And so I think we have to carry that into this work we're doing, whether or not we're talking about a 15-minute city or whether or not we're talking about the fairness and all of these different aspects. We have to realize that even if you have a 15-minute walk everywhere in your community, but you're Black and you can't run in your own community, then that doesn't feel safe. And again, that doesn't mean that we as transportation people have to solve all of those problems, but we have to be aware of them. We have to be cognizant of them, and we have to be willing to think about them as we're trying to plan out solutions, because that's the only way we're going to do our best work. That's the only way we're going to make some of this progress, if we acknowledge that people don't operate in a vacuum, and transportation is key in that. You may not feel like it's key, because when people are talking about defunding the police and this and that, they're talking about criminal justice reform. They're talking about education reform. But transportation is the prism through which we should see all of our social justice issues. Because if I can't get to the doctor, I don't have access to healthcare. If I can't get to school, I don't have access to education. If I don't have mobility, I can't be economically mobile. And so we have to realize that our work is at the core of these civil rights issues.
Absolutely. It's fantastic. And Dea, what do you have to add on to that?
It's really hard to follow Tamika. I will just say that. It's hard to follow Tamika and Freddie. But the only other things that I would add is, speaking to the intersectionality, really getting to what community needs, right? And what's really the root cause, transportation aside, what's really the root cause and those root issues that transportation could be used as that backbone to facilitate the 15-minute city, whatever that looks like. There was one question around the bike, how bikes and other modes of transportation, how those are perceived in communities. And, it could be that, for example, a Latinx community, immigrant community in GES doesn't necessarily want a 15-minute city, or maybe they want a 20-minute city. They don't necessarily want bike lanes because they see that as gentrification. They see that as the wave. And so what we really need to do is understand, how do we work in coalition and in deep partnership with community to better understand what a 15-minute city looks like to them, not what it looks like to me or whoever else in the community, but really that resident that's going to live in that community and wants to stay in that community.
Absolutely, and that's a good point. I think in the work that we have going on, at least in Denver and the surrounding counties, has been really focused on building out the multimodal infrastructure. Bikes and the like has been a huge focus here in Denver. Figuring out ways to support transit and scooters and bike share and all of that. But there in certain communities that's not seen as a priority, and it's difficult when we run into situations where people that might be in Black and brown communities, they figured out a way to bike without this infrastructure. And now you put the infrastructure in and they're seemingly thinking that this is a sign of gentrification. And so to piggyback on what Dea was talking about, I'll be curious, Tamika, I know you had a lot of experience in this, but even Freddie, we're all here in kind of different regions. Freddie's in the DC area. Tamika, you were out west and the like, and then Dea, you're in Denver. But what have you been hearing about all these great and wonderful scooters and bicycle lanes and all this stuff, and how do minority communities really think, or if they're receptive to this new type of infrastructure? So Tamika, why don't you go ahead and kick us off on that one?
Yeah, this is, it's a tired joke that I always use, but it's so true. I think people make the misconception that folks of color don't want, these things. And the reality is, from indigenous folks whose land we're frankly all on, to Black folks in the community, most of us folks of color come from more communal environments. We come from environments where we share things. I always say, Black people invented bike share. Hey, yo, homie, let me borrow your bike for a second. I'm going to bring it right back. And everybody in the neighborhood's riding on the same bike. And so this idea that we don't want these things is false. The reality is that we're just so sick of things being planned for us without including us. And so it's not that we don't want the bike lane, but the bike lane came all of a sudden and nobody talked to us. And the bike lane came, but we can't get the street lights to work. We can't get the bus to show up on time. You promised us the grocery store in that empty lot and it still isn't here. And so I think we have to realize, so often we talk about empowering communities, and empowering, again, taking it back to this colonial settler, as we're approaching Columbus Day, right? Like, empowerment is still a colonial framework of I have the power and I'm going to bestow it upon you. I have the power to tell you should want to watch baseball and look over this fence. And at some point we have to realize that for micromobility or bike share or any of these things to work, it's not that our community members don't want them. They could be extremely helpful. They don't want to be policed for using them, because we know people are calling their neighbors. There's these kids outside on scooters and it's late. Do you call cars driving by when it's late? Right? And so we have to acknowledge that it's just, how do you plan for people with them and not against them and for them, because that's what these communities are used to.
Fantastic.
If I could jump in, what I hear, but I don't hear it, it's a recurring theme, and it's what my wife says all the time. Husbands want to help in and help their wife, and my wife look at me, look, it's not help unless it's something that I need from you or I want. It's like you think you're helping, but if it's not what I need, it's not really help. And that's what she's saying. When you don't take the people in consideration that you're planning for, that's what that is. The other thing that I hear is, we've done everything before. There's been bike share. She gave that example. There was car share. There was Uber before there was Uber. When there was the bus boycotts in Montgomery, how do you think people got around? They went around the communities and carpool. And then when I think about all of these new services, I immediately think about the digital divide. Just because you put it in our community, does everybody still have equal access? They might have a smartphone, but do they have a credit card tied to the smartphone that allows them to access that scooter or that bike? I doubt it. Especially if you go back to Daya's earlier point, if they're already underbanked, I'm dealing with this every day with payments. How do we get rid of cash out of bus systems? That's a very difficult conversation, because there's always somebody that uses cash.
Right. And Daya, do you want to add on to this?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add is, I think both Freddie and Tamika touched on it, right? Communities of color have always done this. This is kind of it's in our blood. It's what we do because we support one another. I think the one thing I just want to hit on is, really looking at and listening to the community and being in community with them. And I think of, sorry, I live next to a train, so I think of Montbello Organizing Committee and the amazing work that they're doing here in Denver around creating originally it was a walkable loop and now it's a ridable loop. But it was because the community was the one that said, okay, we want this. And these are the terms and this is how we want it done. And then just going from there, but really just want to encourage folks, center community.
Absolutely. Very good. All right, we have about 4 minutes left before we want to wrap up. I do want to take a moment, actually, because Freddie mentioned Marvin about 15 times in this conversation around small business. So Marvin, why don't you introduce yourself real quick and just maybe give kind of a 90-second response to kind of the question that Freddie asked, which is, how are you doing it? How are you surviving out there, and how are you working with primes to make some stuff happen?
Okay. Well, first of all, Eulois, thanks for giving me a minute on the stage. Tri-Unity is an engineering company. We started over 17 years ago. My brother and I are both electrical engineers. We started designing control systems. That's how we got our start. We started with RTD, where they're building out their system. Didn't take us long to figure out that I came up with the model. The reason we grow is we're willing to go. So we opened office in Seattle, started working with Sound Transit, then did the same thing in LA. And we've done transit systems all over the United States, Hart, Hawaii, Dallas, Fort Worth, Virginia Beach. So we've been everywhere. I'm going to address two of the things that Freddie said, and I know you only gave me 90 seconds, but one of them was whose responsibility it is it? And then the second was, how can COMTO help? The responsibility it's on both the agencies and the primes. And you hit it on the head when it needs to be intentional. We need to make mandates, and we need to be transparent. And I can give you the examples why I say that. We got the contract in LA Metro, $90 million contract. Our reports are exceptional, but now internal to the agencies, DOD, the agency responsible to help us, because when we bid the thing, they had a 30% requirement. We told them, based on your requirements, we can hit 70%. that became our mandate now. They now said we have to do 70%. We don't have that control over that contract, and certain things are not doing it. Each week I get hit up for a shortfall mitigation because I'm at 69%. Think about that. The organization set up to help the small business. There's no other prime or anybody else that has a 70% goal. We're knocking the snot out of it, but because what we bid in the RFP, so now they're beating us up. So it's internal to the agency. These people have lost control of what their intent of the real purpose was. Another example I said was the agencies need to be intentional and need to be transparent. MBTA, every 3 years, FTA audit, get the heck beat out of them for not compliance. And they can't tell you what their numbers are. I know that there's no African-American firms getting any business, but they're saying they're meeting their MBWE numbers. And I know they're not. It's all white women, but they will never tell you that. Now, and then I said the other part was, how can COMTO help? Individuals can't speak. It's too much for me to go around to each place because each city is different. COMTO chapter in Boston is all agency folks. I tell them these things, how can you help? It's not in their realm to help because how are they going to speak to their boss, their director of civil rights, to tell him, dude, this ain't that hard. But COMTO can still speak if we speak as a voice because each place is different. Each city is totally different how they operate. And me trying to go in and speak as an individual don't work. So those two things I think where they can help is one, knowing whose responsibility is, and the primes need to be just intentional about it. If you make a mandate, don't give them a choice. You don't need to track the hell out of us internally to whether it's DOD or whatever the group is. If you make it a mandate, tell them they have a choice. It's easy to look at the payments. You'll know how percents are getting. So those two things, intentional, mandate, transparency, will take care of a lot of problems for a small business.
All right, Marvin. Well, I appreciate
seconds.
You went a little bit long, but I think that's good commentary though. So we appreciate it, and thanks for being put on the spot. Definitely appreciate it. But it's always good to hear directly from our members and people that have done work across the country. So folks, we are at 6:40. Well, we said that we wanted to wrap up at this time. I really want to appreciate Tamika, Daya, and Freddie. You guys were fantastic today. And we're gonna have you back. Okay. So thanks for your time. And I think Marcia wanted to throw it, I believe, back to you. Because we just wanted to let folks know how you can get in contact with the Colorado COMTO chapter and kind of be made abreast of some of the sessions and meetings and activities that we're planning moving forward. But fantastic panel. Thank you all three. Very well done. And just a reminder for those of you who are still on the session now, please check us out. We're trying to enhance our social presence here. So we do have a Twitter account for the president. There is a COMTO Colorado chapter account on LinkedIn, and then for Facebook, of course, we do have a COMTO Colorado Facebook page. And again, we are really trying to build, organize, learn, and earn, and really go and focus in on making sure that we're delivering on the promises of that motto, which was really something that Dr. Martin Luther King really laid out in one of his final speeches before he perished. So it's our responsibility to help support individuals in the transportation space, minorities in the transportation industry, and some of our small businesses to really make change and move towards justice and make sure we have equity for all. So well done, panel. Well done, Marcia. And I'll stop and see if there's anything else. If not, we can close it out.
No, I think that's it. We just want to, again, thank everyone who was on the panel. This was such an amazing event. Eulois, thank you for moderating. And to the COMTO Colorado executive team and board, we thank you for your support. To all of you who are members, we thank you. And if you are not a member, we absolutely welcome you to join our organization at COMTOcolorado.org. So thank you, everybody.
Hey, you.